Today, on How It's Made. Fire extinguishers. We answer those burning questions. Donuts. The whole story. Shock absorbers. 4 for the road. And banjos. They come with strings attached. The first fire extinguisher on record was in Europe in the Middle Ages. It worked like a giant syringe, used to squirt water at a fire. The modern extinguisher uses compressed air as a propellant. The fire-dousing substance is either water or a chemical liquid, powder, or foam. Squeezing the lever opens a valve that releases compressed air. The pressure propels a chemical through the hose and out the nozzle. To make the release valve, they start with cylindrical pieces of aluminum, called blanks. A carousel runs each one through 16 different machining stations. At each stop, under a shower of lubricant, tools shape the blank for 6.5 seconds. As each blank completes the circuit, it comes off the carousel. From blank to valve in 1.25 minutes. Now they rivet the fire extinguisher's aluminum handle onto the valve. It pivots on a pin. Next, they rivet an aluminum lever onto the handle. This is the lever you squeeze to use the fire extinguisher. Then comes the valve stem, the valve's inner workings. Workers simply place it inside, and an automated assembly machine does the rest. It positions a spring over the stem to create resistance when you squeeze the lever. Then a retainer to hold both the stem and spring in position. Now workers slip on a plastic thimble to position the rubber O-ring that goes on next. The O-ring acts as a seal between the valve and cylinder, so nothing leaks out. The siphon tube runs from the valve down into the cylinder. The firefighting chemical goes up this tube, then out the nozzle. The compressed air inside the cylinder is what propels the chemical. This gauge shows if the pressure is sufficient for this to happen. After coating the gauge's threaded stem with sealant to prevent leaks, they screw it onto the valve. The valve unit is now fully assembled, tested, and ready for installation on top of the cylinder. To attach it, the cylinder needs a threaded collar. With the help of a press, a worker positions it. The cylinder also needs a bottom. The technique the factory uses to permanently fuse the bottom and collar is called brazing. It's similar to soldering, but with a copper ring as a bonding metal. After positioning a brazing ring at the base of the open cylinder, they press in a steel bottom. Then they position a brazing ring over the collar. Now into a brazing furnace for 1 hour and 45 minutes. The heat, 1100 degrees Celsius, melts the 2 copper rings, bonding the parts they connect. Next stop, the static paint booth, where they run a positive electrical charge to the paint particles and a negative charge to the cylinders. This draws the paint onto the surface evenly. Then it's into an oven for 45 minutes to bake the paint. Once the cylinders cool, automated machinery fills them with a fire extinguishing powder. The main ingredient is a form of ammonia. When you spray it on a fire, the heat melts the particles, fusing them into an oxygen-blocking blanket that smothers the flames. After filling, an automated machine screws a valve onto the collar of each cylinder. Now it's time to pressurize the cylinder. They squeeze the lever to open the valve, enabling a compressor to fill the cylinder with air. They keep filling until the air pressure is 13 bars, about 6 times the pressure in a car tire. Next, they screw on the nozzle and install a locking pin. This immobilizes the lever so the extinguisher can't discharge accidentally. As the instruction sticker says, in case of fire, you just pull the pin, aim, and spray. This mounting bracket lets you hang the fire extinguisher in an accessible spot, so it's close at hand if you need it. Donuts used to be called oily cakes because they were deep fried in pork fat. They were ball-shaped when Dutch pilgrims brought them to America. But then someone soon found that removing a nut of dough from the center helped them cook far more evenly, and so the donut was born. In the world of donuts, there are 2 basic types: yeast donuts and cake donuts. The batter for cake donuts drops from the mixer right into boiling vegetable oil. The nozzles shape the dough as it passes. The donuts fry for about 1.5 minutes. Then a conveyor carries them out of the vat to cool. Yeast donuts require more time to make. A high-speed mixer works the yeast dough. Then workers pull it off the machine into bins. From there, it goes into a hopper that extrudes the dough as a sheet. Then it's onto another conveyor belt, where a series of rollers flatten the dough sheet to just 2 centimeters thick. Next, the sheet passes under a shower of cinnamon. Then hits a rotating cylinder that rolls it into a log. A small metal rod sprinkles the dough with water. This keeps it sticky, so it holds its shape while going under another flattening roller. A dusting of cornstarch keeps the dough from sticking to the blade that now cuts it into pieces. A retractable arm drops the blocks of dough 4 at a time onto wire mesh trays. Then it's off to the proofer, a machine much like a large bread box in which heat and humidity make the yeast dough rise. This leavening process takes about 20 minutes, during which time the trays, over 300 of them, go up and down and then out to the fryer. A gate slows them down just before the drop, so they slide in without splashing. Gas burners keep that oil at a constant boil. Anything less and the donuts would come out partly raw. Halfway through, it's time to flip the donuts so they cook evenly throughout. After 2 minutes, the donuts leave the fryer and move through a curtain of sweet glaze. A strong air current blows off the excess. And they're done. They gradually cool as they spiral through the production area on their way to packaging. Now let's see how they make donuts with filling. A machine separates the yeast dough into little blobs, then sends them rolling down plastic tunnels. This shapes them first into little pucks, then into round dough balls. Rollers then flatten the balls before they enter the proofer to rise. There's cornstarch everywhere to prevent the dough from sticking to the machinery or to the conveyor belt. Row after row of donuts fry in hot oil. Then slide into a large drum that tumbles them around, covering them with a sugary coating. Now it's time for the donuts to get their fill. These nozzles inject just the right amount of jelly, 2 at a time. Each worker fills 45 donuts a minute. After filling, these donuts, known as Bismarcks, are ready to go on to packaging. They're just one of the many delicious varieties that make devouring a donut a holy experience. Shock absorbers do more than just make your ride smoother. They counteract the bounce when you hit a bump, holding your tires to the road. Without that traction, you'd lose control. So by affecting steering, stopping, and stability, shocks are actually a vital safety component. Wheel vibrations cause a piston inside the shock absorber to force oil through a valve. This absorbs energy, dampening the vehicle's bounce. All this happens within the shock's 2 tubes, the reserve tube, and inside it, the pressure tube, housing the piston rod and compression valve. The factory makes both these tubes from a steel sheet sliced into strips. Inside this tube mill, coolant prevents the passing strip from overheating as one forming roller after another gradually rounds it into a tube. Then a copper welding wheel fuses the tube closed. As the 5.5 meter long tube comes off the mill, a cutting tool chops it into shock absorber lengths. The tube making process is the same for the reserve and pressure tubes, except that the reserve tubes undergo one extra step, compressing the ends. This enables the shock to house a larger reserve tube that can hold more oil. The reserve tube's final stop is a press. A die inside stamps the part number, the manufacturing date, and the brand name. Many components are made of powdered metal, mostly iron powder mixed with some graphite and copper. After a press compacts the powder in a die, a furnace fuses the particles. This powdered metal part is the valve through which the piston forces the oil. Steel discs and a spring help control the speed with which the valve operates for varying driving conditions. A stamping tool crimps the end of the tube, holding the spring in position. The valve, now fully assembled, seals the bottom of the pressure tube. Meanwhile, a press punches round steel discs into other components. These loops mount the shock absorber to the vehicle. A worker positions a cup on each one, then a robot welds them together. They insert a cup and mount unit on one end of the reserve tube, then weld it on. This unit is called the base assembly. The base assemblies now go on a conveyor, open end up, so that workers can drop a pressure tube inside each one. Automated injectors now fill it with oil that's specially designed to maintain its consistency despite changes in temperature. Next comes the head assembly. That includes the steel piston rod and the mount on the other end of the shock absorber. 2 copper welding wheels fuse the head assembly to the base assembly with a cap. This closes the unit, sealing the oil inside. Next, they weld on a dirt shield, a steel casing that prevents dirt from hindering the movement of the piston rod. Now they press a bushing into each mount. This helps tone down the vibrations coming from the vehicle. Now it's onto an automated carousel. Robots pierce a hole in each shock and inject nitrogen gas to prevent the oil inside from foaming. After injection, the robot seals the hole by welding on a tiny steel ball. And now for the finishing touch, an electrostatic paint job. A machine runs a positive electrical current through the shocks and a negative one through the paint particles. Like a magnet, the static electricity draws the paint onto the shocks in a flawless coat. In the factory's quality control lab, technicians use sophisticated equipment to evaluate how well a shock dampens movement at different speeds. The tube and valve configuration inside varies by vehicle, so the shocks on a ground-hugging sports car are quite different from those on a luxury sedan or on a rugged light truck. The twang of the banjo resonates in American country music and bluegrass. But this down-home sound actually has its roots in Africa, with slaves who came to America and wanted something that sounded like the instruments from home. They devised the banjo, and the rest is music history. To make a banjo, they carve a lip into wood that's been steamed and bent into a circular rim. They measure the rim carefully. It must be a perfect fit for this metal tone ring, so they do a preliminary fitting. The wooden back of the banjo acts as a sound resonator. They embellish it with some plastic trim to give it a more stylish look. A chemical accelerator helps the glue dry, so the plastic trim adheres almost instantly. They sand it until the plastic is flush to the wood. This long piece of wood will become the banjo's neck. Using a table saw, they cut a long slot into the neck to allow them to install a metal adjusting rod later. The artisan widens the end of the neck with 2 pieces of wood to form the instrument's peg head. Next, they do some very delicate work. They embed tiny mother-of-pearl decorations in a piece of ebony. They glue that inlaid piece of ebony onto the banjo's peg head and clamp it to dry. Now it's over to a saw with 22 blades. They pass a long piece of ebony over those blades to make 22 fret slots. This is the banjo's fingerboard. Once it's been adorned with more inlaid decorations, they glue the fingerboard onto the banjo neck. At this point, they trim the edges of the banjo neck and peg head down to size. Using this router, they give the back and sides of the banjo neck smoother contours. The rounded edges will make the instrument easier to hold and play. They finalize the shape of the neck with a rasp, then give it a thorough sanding. Here, they tap metal frets into the slots on the fingerboard, then trim the overlap. Now it's time for a little color. They rub some stain onto the banjo parts. When the stain dries, they spray on 12 coats of lacquer. Then polish off the job with a thorough buffing. Now all the pieces come together, beginning with the pre-fitted tone ring and wooden rim. The plastic head through which the banjo's sound will radiate fits on the tone ring. They secure the head with a tension hoop and little hooks. Tightening these hooks will stretch the plastic head to adjust the tone. They attach the banjo neck with its peg head and secure it with metal rods. They screw the tuning pegs into the peg head. Then pull a string up to the tuning peg and tighten it. This little wooden bridge sits on the plastic head and is only held in place by tension from the strings. Finally, they install the wooden back of the banjo. As you can see, making a banjo is a major production. But now, it's ready for showbiz.